So here we are. Happy New Year. Happy January. This is our first Storytime broadcast. Excuse me, first Storytime broadcast for the new year. And I've spent some time in December, not only with my typical reflection and introspection, but also trying to sort out my purpose, my intention for beginning again, not only with story time, but in the work that I do here at Life's Work Yoga. And so in light of my promise, right, January is all about the intention. And in fact, there's a number of opportunities to explore intention as the first of 3 components that comprise what I call transparent alignment. Storytime is going to embark on this journey of exploring transparent alignment by way of my real life experience story. And I'm pointing to my leg because although you can't see it on camera, it's wrapped up with a half cast and ice underneath the knee and propping and all sorts of such because I had surgery on my foot a week ago. Now, we're also going to be exploring transparent alignment in Storytime and Coaches Chat, as well as through many of our practices, our community practices, but also in terms of our vision board workshop that will happen on Saturday, the 15th. So what does that mean? Well, to decipher the difference between Storytime and Coaches Chat, I want to make clear that Storytime is really about our lived experiences, about how we live in this world and then bring in this philosophy, this perspective to choose to practice yoga in the day-to-day operations of living. Whereas Coaches Chat tends to be much more from the philosophy and then move towards how does this make sense? How do we apply this into our life? So one might be a bit of an inductive experience, right? Starting from the experience and working our way out. Whereas the other one is more of a deductive experience, starting from the perspective, the philosophy, the theory, and diving in. Regardless, it's all the same to me. It's all yoga. And so join me on Thursday for Coaches Chat to explore what I mean philosophically and intellectually about intention. But for today's story time, I want to take you through what my intention is and how it relates to not only my foot surgery, but the practice of yoga. So let's rewind the calendar before COVID. Was there such a time before COVID? Yes, there was. And maybe like me, you have a hard time remembering what that was like. But I do know that there was a time before COVID because I went to the doctor, podiatrist, about 5-6 years ago with severe foot pain to the point that I couldn't walk but a few feet, a block or so. It got so bad that I was truly in pain every time that my foot would strike the ground or the floor. So at that time, wonderful doctor, he diagnosed me with basically malformed feet. I have severe bunions, which have then pushed the bones over into obtuse angles and creating what is called a neuroma or a bundle of nerves. Now, I'm so balanced. These are the words of my current PT practitioner. I'm so balanced between right and left. Says, I've never worked with someone that is so balanced, but I'm so balanced that I get to do this a second time with my other foot. Yay! Such a great thing. The point being is that surgery was required to realign the structure of my foot. And that, I can honestly tell you, is the culmination of not just 5 years of the adaptation that my doctor gave me of insoles, right? So orthopedic doctor prescribed insoles and super cushiony, dense shoes. And then also I was doing everything that I know and have learned from therapeutic perspectives, both in my relationship with personal trainers and physical therapists, but also from yoga therapy to realign the relationship between the soft tissue and the hard tissue, the bones, the ligaments, and the tendons. And this past summer, so now about 6 months ago, my feet were unbearable once again, to the point where I couldn't walk to the studio. I couldn't even walk halfway to the studio. And the studio is about 2 miles from my home. And that was the whole point about locating my studio in this particular space and having a studio even outside of my home, was to create a space that was accessible enough that I could come and go easily without having to drive, but also have enough distance between my home and my work so that there was transition. And that's something that I have noticed, particularly given COVID, is that a lot of people have lost their commute time, in which case they unknowingly, and for many of us, unwillingly gave up their transition time, their digestion time between the day's events of work and the day's events of family and life at home. So my husband being one of them. So he and I have had some strong conversations of me encouraging him to find ways in which to shift that time that's no longer in his commute, but more importantly, to shift that energy between the same room that he does his work in is the room that he does his play in. And that can often cause conflict in the sense that one carries over into the other or vice versa. So how does this relate to my foot? Well, I've done everything within my knowledge. I've sought out the experts, everything in their knowledge. And this is part of the wise application, which, if you remember, yoga is really about compassion and wise application of what we know in practice. Well, my practice is living. My practice is walking. My practice is being available to teach and to guide students in this journey of yoga. So when my foot was so pained that I couldn't walk, not only does it affect my ability to get to the studio, but it affects my emotional well-being as well. In which case, believe it or not, compassion was becoming more and more difficult to call upon because I was so angry and frustrated with my own body. Now, fortunately or not, I have experience from the past of other interventions, medical interventions that were necessary, in which case my mental construct of my responsibility and my definition caused me to resort to self-loathing and self-blaming, that it's my fault that I need this surgery. It's my fault that this is what happens. And so I actually asked my doctor verbatim, I said, what did I do or what should I have done to avoid this? And he said, Kimberlyn, this is not your fault. And so I took a breath in that moment in the office. And this is before I talked to the surgeon, before I committed to doing the surgery. But there was something powerful in that moment, because I can literally tell you, if I had doctors in the past who've told me, yes, this is your fault. You have to have surgery because you did something wrong. You did something to harm yourself. And whether that's true or not true, right? Depending on how far back you take that sequence of events to cause and to result in surgery, need this major intervention. The point of the matter is my intention is to live well. And so, ironically, in order for me to improve my daily living, I have to take a step back and be immobile, what could be for the next 3 to 4 months, progressively regaining mobility in order to hopefully regain the mobility of free stand, of free walk. In other words, it seems a bit counterproductive to take weight off of my foot and perhaps even screwing up my pelvis and my hips as a result of the imbalance of wearing what is my lovely, this is my peg leg cane, in order to get out around basically from the bathroom to the bedroom and back and forth. So needless to say, perhaps, sometimes we have to take a step back in order to take a step forward, because I've taken all of the steps forward that were available to me, to the point where we'd even gone through the second and the third tier of intervention from the podiatrist perspective, to the point where he said, there is no other option for you. You either live with this pain and know that it's going to continue to get worse because your body is out of alignment. Well, this is language that makes sense to me, right? I use the phrase transparent alignment specifically because alignment is that state of ease. And so in order to create greater alignment in my foot, I have to endure this misalignment in my body and even in my practice in order to hope that the surgery, that the restructuring of my foot will not only create a more stable and more aligned foundation, but it will alleviate the pressure that is causing the pain that is making it impossible for me to live in alignment with the life that I want, a life of independence, a life of autonomy, a life of mobility, a life of compassion. So how does all of this relate to Patanjali as the founder of our yoga practice? Well, courage, first of all, right? Courage to do something that there are no guarantees that this is going to work, but also courage to redefine my practice. Because I've been taking some pretty strong narcotics for the last few days, in which case meditation, honestly, wasn't a safe place for me. And yet asana is not also a safe place for me. I was able to roll around and do some yin postures this morning, which was lovely. And for the most part, I'm doing Dasha or the joint lubrication. When I come to the second side foot, I visualize, which thank goodness that is a form of meditation practice. But the introspection, the quiet turning in of pratyahara and reflection and really diving deep into the emotions has not been a safe place. And maybe that is because I'm still digesting the story of my surgery, but it's also the consequence of being on some really powerful, strong pain controlling drugs, in which case I'm breathing. That's the practice, right? And in that practice of being okay with just breathing, it aligns my intention with compassion and truth. In other words, this is what I can do. This is what is available. And it's the best application of what I know. So I don't know that this is going to necessarily easily translate for you. But if you know me at all, you know that everything comes back to yoga, that it's all yoga. And in this January of beginning again, I'm using this not only as an opportunity to get clear on my intention and my life's work, but also to do the things, to do the hard things, letting go of the stuff that isn't working anymore, right? I've done all the therapy. I've done all of the tools and the props. I've worn all the shoes and the slippers, and I've exhausted what we know. Something needs to shift. In other words, the alignment of my bones in my foot need to shift in order not only to create a strong foundation of my foot on the floor, but the neuromuscular connection of my foot hitting the floor to trigger the muscles up into my buttocks. My gluteus maximus has been deficient because of the striking zone of my foot on the floor. The irony of all of this is that, yeah, I've compensated for, well, let's say about 40 some years. I've compensated for this misalignment, and I've done a fairly good job. But like all misalignments, once we reach the edge of what we can work around, there's really only one choice, and that is to accept what is and to begin again. So, am I happy about having to have surgery? No. Am I grateful that surgery is available and poses the high potential of helping to cure, fix, alleviate? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so not only is my brain foggy and difficult for quiet contemplation of meditation, but I'm having to reframe much of my story to find the compassion and the love, to find the hope while in limbo of waiting to see whether or not this works. If it works, then we'll begin again in the fall to do the other leg. Intention is getting clear on what matters most. But intention is not always forward momentum. Sometimes it literally is pausing to just be in it, to recalibrate, to reassess. And sometimes it's choosing to take a step back, to redo, to undo, to begin again with a new foundation. And that's what intention is about for me, is getting clear and letting go of what I thought I was supposed to be doing in order to embrace the real work of living authentically and in community. So I'm grateful for my surgeons. I'm grateful for my caretakers. I'm grateful for my community in supporting me in the weird way in which I show up to teach. I'm grateful for all of those who have gone before, that have had this surgery and shared their experience and taught my surgeon more through the process of living and learning. I look forward to hearing your takeaways, how this might relate to your beginning again. And what is it that you're getting clear about your intention, and specifically where you might be seeing a glimmer, just the hint of misalignment that needs to be shifted. Whether that's a surgical intervention, I hope not, but what's the difference between a scalpel intervention and the mind's intention of going deeper to pull back the layers? They are both, in fact, a way of diving deeper to clearer seeing, to greater knowing, in order to activate more love and compassion. And that's the heart of our yoga practice. And that's the heart of living from intention. Take care of you. Take care of those around you. Continue to come back to this question of what matters most, and work from that place to find a firm foundation to move into whatever's next for you. May you breathe deeply and move freely, labor lovingly, and live vibrantly. Namaste. Thanks, sir.
I have two questions for you.
Sure.
One, how did you get upstairs? I'm imagining you hopped on one foot.
Yep. So this holds my shin, and I can hold the railing, and then I use my good leg to step up, and then I bring this one up. Now, truth be told, that has taken me a little time to accommodate. When I got home from surgery, I did the butt scoot. You know how little kids will climb up the stairs? I did the butt scoot up the stairs. And I was prepared to do that today if this wasn't going to work. But I have a hand railing and I have a wall. So as long as I'm in kind of a narrow space, I can get enough stability. So, yeah.
Cool. The other question was, when you said, because you've been on narcotics, that meditation doesn't feel like a safe space right now, what does that mean for you?
I can't control my mind to know where it's going down a path that could be threatening. And I attribute that to the narcotics, to the fact that I'm not in control. I'm having heart palpitations. I'm having quakiness, shakiness in my fingers. So as a practice of compassion, I've relieved myself from free form, dhyana style meditation, and stuck to dharana style meditation, or specific tasks, specific things to hold on to, even if it's riding the wave of what am I feeling, where am I feeling, right? Or following the breath. Breath is probably my favorite dharana practice. And what I can say is that I don't know that it's not safe. I just don't know that it is safe. And it's not worth the risk to me. One, to have a bad experience, right? An unsafe experience. But it's also not worth the risk that it's important enough to me that this, there are those who will use narcotics to induce a high. I'm not in a space to even process if I have a high of a high, in which case it would be, I don't want to say it would be moot, but it would be too much information for my body and my mind to process right now. So I'm not going deep. I'm maintaining. Does that make sense, the difference?
Yeah, it definitely does. So when you say you can't control where your mind's going to go, is that like Ram Dass says, don't think of hippopotamus. You're going to think of hippopotamus. Is it
Yeah.
kind of like that? Like something negative comes up and you can't help but latch onto it?
I think it's more preemptive, because I can honestly say that I haven't had any self-harm thoughts. I haven't had any fearful thoughts, other than, like I shared earlier, in the sense that earlier, before surgery, there was the beginnings of, this is your fault, right? That you did this. So because I know that that's my history, that's what I'm most fearful, tangibly fearful of getting into that spiral of self-blame and self-loathing. Now, with that said, I haven't had that, but I also am putting up the boundaries to protect myself from having that. So when I was on bed rest from my concussion, I couldn't listen to music, or I couldn't have noise, in which case I was left isolated in my own headspace. Whereas now I have pretty much occupied every waking moment with some sort of audio book or a YouTube video. And that has been intentional, of a strategy to keep me mentally focused on something other than the story that I know lingers beneath the surface, which is,
Why
go ahead.
do you only intend to keep yourself from facing that stuff right now while you feel like you're not quite in control, or is that always your intention?
No. It's only right now, so that my breath practice and my focused intention practice are a designated time, right? So I do those still every single day, 10 to 15 minutes. But I can't get into the same postures that I would normally. And so that knowledge and wisdom has to influence my practice as well. But it's the time in between that intention. In other words, my intention when I'm not intentionally meditating is to not meditate, and not to accidentally meditate, specifically letting the mind wander. Because in my regular living, the walk between home and the studio is my prime space for dhyana flow style of letting whatever ebb and flow in and out. And it's a great, not only digestion, but also peeling back of layers, because I feel safe in that space. I have no to-do lists that require my attention other than to put one foot in front of the other. So I know that that practice will come back when I free myself to do that practice, but strictly as a extra cautionary intention. I am not free form meditating right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do in terms of the witness perspective. What I'm saying is that's the most right thing I know to do in my fallible human perspective.
For every other time I've meditated on drugs, I have felt that exact same way. The reason I asked is a couple nights ago, I went pretty deep. I overdosed what I intended to, I suppose. And I came up upon a really, really scary thought and emotion and feeling. And usually at that point, I would throw myself into asana to pull myself, ground myself back in my body, get it out of there. But I didn't do that this time. I just let it come, and I kind of faced it for a few minutes, and it was not what I expected to happen. It didn't have the incredible fear response that I thought was coming. It was more like okay, I can't run from this forever. What's up? And things were okay. So I was going down this whole line of questioning to think, like, maybe if you find a moment of inspiration while on the narcotics, see if you can lean in. See what happens.
Yeah. And there may be, and honestly, I would expect that may be easier to do when it comes time to do the second leg, because I'll have a foundation of experience. Right now, I think that a lot of even my narcotic experience is still the digestion and the processing of the last time that I was on a hard prescription, which was post-abdominal surgery, which was a very traumatic, not only in the anatomical recovery component, but also in the emotional, spiritual component of that. Me needing to have a second surgery after the surgeon injured me, caused me an injury, and failed to take responsibility or even own up that that could have been within his scalpel touch. So I think that is probably the deeper layer right now, that if I had to that is happening on a level that is subconscious. By having an experience that is conscious, I'm letting that be rewired. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing that I would make note too is that, like when we talk about entering into a meditation practice, your awareness of the trigger was the moment where you re-entered meditation with a new intention. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's, although it's the same sit perhaps, by having enough cognitive awareness to set that new attention and know your escape route, know your coping mechanism of the asana practice, that's exactly what I mean by having your exit strategy determined. And given that I am not a regular drug user of any sort, I don't have, one, the confidence, two, the competence to know what's going to help me pull myself out of that place. Right? So again, it always comes back to these very, very simple things. I have the courage to be in it, but I'm not pushing the edge because I don't have confidence and competence that I know how to get back from that edge. Hence, we work with guides, right?
That makes total sense, because it's taken me a couple of years to finally allow this to even begin to bud. So
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for the
for
information.
asking those questions. That was helpful for me as well.